Well, good morning, Westplex. Welcome to Westplex Radio's What About Nutrition with David Gall of O'Fallon Nutrition. I'm Steve Casper, your co-host this morning. Welcome to What About Nutrition, the show that explores the link between nutrition and optimum health and asks the overlooked question, what about nutrition? Every day there's more and more scientific evidence and research regarding the critical importance of nutrition for the promotion of optimum health for you, those you love, your family. On What About Nutrition, this radio program will focus in on dietary supplements, herbs, vitamins, and homeopathic remedies, what they are, what they do, and how to use them. We'll also discuss diet, exercise, and other aspects of living a healthy lifestyle in the 21st century. So welcome to the show. Your host is David Gall, sitting beside me, owner of O'Fallon Nutrition and a graduate of Washington University and Huntington College of Health Sciences Comprehensive Nutrition Program. And you're gonna know where he got all this knowledge now, because it's amazing what this guy knows. Remember, always consult your healthcare practitioner before beginning any new supplements or any other changes to your lifestyle. The purpose of the show is to inform, educate, and entertain, not to diagnose, treat, or prevent any disease. And the folks over at O'Fallon Nutrition, all of them are highly, highly trained. We talked about that in our last episode. And so you can always find out more about O'Fallon Nutrition by going to O'FallonNutrition.com. That's O'FallonNutrition.com. They're in O'Fallon, Missouri, out on Veterans Memorial Parkway on the west end of town, kind of right behind JJ's Restaurant and out by Fort Zumwalt Square. Well, good morning, David. What are we going to do today?
Hey, good morning, Steve. Today is going to be a follow-up to last week, which was the show where we talked about adrenal exhaustion and kind of the connection between hypoglycemia or blood sugar problems and adrenals. And then I mentioned a little bit on thyroid today, last week in regards to that, and that's what we're going to get into today. So, thyroid, this is a big issue. Synthroid is one of the most commonly prescribed drugs in America. The statistic I found in my book was a little old, but in 1998, it was the second most prescribed drug in the country.
Synthroid?
Synthroid.
Oh.
So just good old classic thyroid medication.
Yeah, that's right.
That's not even adding up all the different thyroid medications together. So I'm sure we have a lot of listeners out there that have thyroid issues or have family members with thyroid issues. And today we're going to talk mostly about what we call simple hypothyroid, which is just ordinary low thyroid, and probably have some comments on thyroiditis, or what's known as Hashimoto's, which is the autoimmune disease that folks can get that affects the thyroid as well. And the reason that this is a follow-up show to our adrenal show is that a lot of alternative health books and textbooks will talk about the link between adrenal exhaustion and hypo or low thyroid. And the main thing to get from that, or the connection, is that if the adrenals become overactive, the body is trying to maintain a state known as homeostasis. And homeostasis is simply kind of a fancy term for keeping everything level and the same and in balance. And so when the adrenals get into the early stages of exhaustion, they actually are working too much, and they overproduce adrenaline, and they overproduce adrenaline's cousin cortisol. And so the body feels very, very stimulated. Almost like you're overly caffeinated all the time, but from within. And what happens then is the body, in its infinite wisdom, will often downregulate the thyroid while the adrenals are overproducing their stress hormones. So you can have a situation where you're under stress and you're feeling kind of wired, your adrenals are overworking, but meanwhile you can actually start burning fewer calories because your thyroid tries to compensate for the overactive adrenals by calming down. So whenever we hear about thyroid issues, it's always a good idea to explore the idea of whether or not somebody has issues with adrenal exhaustion. Sometimes that's the missing link that makes it so that the thyroid can't quite bounce back. But let's talk about normal hypothyroid and some of the nutritional things. What about nutrition with hypothyroid? We're always hearing about low thyroid and folks being on medication, but to me, from a nutritional perspective, why is it that we have a fifth of our country on these medications? Why do we all need them, in other words? Obviously, if we need to treat this, we need to treat it, but doesn't it raise some cause for alarm if so many of us are having thyroid issues? What's going on?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'd like to talk about what might be going on. So, we all have probably heard that the thyroid gland uses a mineral called iodine. I'm sure you've heard of iodine,
Heard
Steve,
about
and
that.
we've all heard about iodized salt.
Right.
Well, part of the reason we have iodized salt is that back in the earlier part of the 20th century, the United States federal government recognized that folks were having issues with iodine deficiencies. And when you're deficient in iodine at an extreme level, you'll develop what's known as a goiter.
Right.
Okay, so a goiter is a swollen thyroid, and just for everybody, the thyroid gland is almost like a butterfly-shaped gland that sits just under your Adam's apple. And if it
Really?
gets,
I did not know it was there.
it's in your throat. Yeah. So it's in your throat, right under your Adam's apple. And when it swells, it almost can create like an apple-shaped swelling below your Adam's apple, and that's known as a goiter. And in fact, the Midwest and parts of the South were known as the goiter belt in the early part of the 20th century because goiters were so common. And in fact, in some circles, they were looked at as a sign of maturity in young women, for example. They
Right.
would get their swelling in their throat around puberty, and folks would say, she's a grown woman now. But really, it was a result of deficiency of iodine. Okay? And we may have heard some people, hey, Steve, you're kind of a cretin.
Yeah.
You ever heard of those?
Yeah.
So cretins, cretinism is something that can develop where folks have basically mental impairment, and that can be a result of insufficient iodine as well. So the United States government, in its wisdom, decided to iodize salt at some point halfway through the 20th century. I don't know the exact date. And this was a great public health thing that, at the very least, did help to resolve the tremendous commonality of goiters. So it did help. But that said, there are a lot of compounds in our food known as things like bromides that block the uptake of iodine. You hear about folks like weirdo health food store folks that don't want fluoride in their water or fluoride in their toothpaste.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one reason for that, I'm not going to try and get too deep into the fluoride controversy today, but one reason is that fluoride is one of these compounds that blocks the uptake of iodine. So we're drinking fluoridated water, we're brushing our teeth with fluoridated toothpaste, and we have a country that has an epidemic of thyroid issues. I wonder if they're
Wow.
connected.
Yeah.
I won't even answer that today. I'll let everybody else wonder about it themselves too. So we have fluoride that blocks the uptake of iodine. You may have heard of brominated flour. Well, our flour is known as brominated flour in the United States. If you're eating regular bread, it's brominated flour. And so it has these bromides in the flour itself that block the uptake of iodine.
Wow.
If you don't absorb enough iodine, or you absorb things like bromides or fluoride in place of iodine, then it's a given that the thyroid gland is going to malfunction.
Yep.
Now, in other countries such as Japan, the average daily intake of iodine is far, far higher than it is in the U.S. And this is because they eat a lot of ocean foods, specifically seaweed or kelp. If you see sushi, there's always seaweed or kelp involved, etc. So the average daily consumption in some books I have read is up to around 15 milligrams a day in countries such as Japan. Whereas in the United States, it's maybe a couple hundred micrograms, which is a fraction. It takes 1,000 micrograms to equal 1 milligram. So 15 milligrams is dramatically more than a couple of hundred micrograms, which is typically how much iodine you'll see in a multivitamin, or that you might think that you're going to get from some of your iodized salt. So there's folks out there, like there's a Dr. Brownstein that wrote a book called Iodine, Why You Need It, which I would recommend folks look into. And he goes deep into this, and he's done testing on, and he is an MD, by the way, on hundreds of his own patients. And they actually use these tests that are pretty wild. They actually have people store their urine for 24 hours, and they give them a bunch of iodine before they have them do this, and they measure how much comes out in the urine over 24 hours. And if the person is deficient in iodine, they'll retain most of it. Very little will come out of the urine. And if they're not deficient, a whole bunch will come out. So they just simply measure how much iodine is left behind at the end of this test in the person's urine. And lo and behold, the vast majority of his patients have severe deficiencies in iodine.
Wow.
Now, iodine is also involved in many other health issues like regulation of the immune system. It plays a role in that. Iodine is also very heavily concentrated in the breasts. So Dr. Brownstein points out that another issue related to deficiencies in iodine is fibrocystic breast disease or fibrocystic breasts. And his point that he makes, or his hypothesis, is that deficiencies in iodine contribute directly to this. Now, anecdotally, we have seen customers and even one employee who had suffered from issues like that and then used iodine and had significant changes in that. So, of course, we can't talk about curing or treating things, but iodine is supportive of breast health as well as thyroid health. So the point here in our first segment is that folks may not be getting enough iodine, and like vitamin D, which now we're all hearing we need far more than we used to be told we needed even 10 years ago, right? Now all of a sudden we all understand from testing that we're low in vitamin D. Well, there's very little iodine testing going on except for physicians like this Dr. Brownstein who wrote that book, Iodine, Why You Need It. But the preliminary things seem to be showing deficiency, and countries where iodine intake is far higher have lower rates of breast cancer, again Japan, and lower rates of common hypo or low thyroidism. So when we come back in the next segment, we're going to talk about this a little deeper. We're going to talk about what nutrients and supplements can support healthy thyroid, and then a few comments on thyroiditis.
That could be huge. I mean, there's breast cancer is just ravaging this country.
Definitely.
And that is fascinating. What's even more fascinating to me, or even criminal, is you just don't hear about a lot of these remedies in our society, and we'll talk. That's a whole different subject.
Not as much profit in them; they can't be patented.
No, that's all about pharmaceutical stuff and money, 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 and that's what this show's about, to give you an overall knowledge of everything, and then you can go ahead and use that knowledge.
Yeah, you can think for yourself and look into things.
Absolutely. Steve Casper, and with me, David Gall, Mr. Nutrition. We're going to come back with part 2. And I'm really excited to hear because you always wrap things up really good in part 2.
We'll tie it all together.
You're listening to What About Nutrition on Westplex Radio. Steve Casper, David Gall. We will be right back.